Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of the One Hood Power Hour. I'm here with my esteemed colleague Miracle Jones, and Kahari Mosley should be joining us shortly as well, as per usual. Um, so, so there's been a lot of different things going on in Pittsburgh, even as the holiday season is quickly approaching this week. A lot of things have still been ongoing, and are important to talk about. So that's what we're here for tonight. We're going to have a panel of great guests for you shortly here. We're joined by Paul Juvis, attorney for the Romir Talley family, as well as James Harris, the superintendent for Woodland Hills School District, and Kevin Mosley, a public speaker and retired Pennsylvania State Trooper. So on this episode, we'll be talking a lot about different issues with policing, police violence, police brutality, and again, specifically Romir Talley and his family and all of the ongoing efforts this week to celebrate him and his legacy, honor Romir Talley, uplift his family, as well as to advocate for justice in that ongoing case. So that's one of the big things we'll be talking about tonight, our main topic. We had a toy drive in his honor in Wilkinsburg over the weekend. We were able to give away, several hundred toys to people around the community, while continuing to advocate for justice and uplift his family. We had people on site, painting, doing a painting of Romir with his son, which was really great to see. And just a lot of people came out, distributed a lot of presents to the kids. All of our programming this week really, in conjunction with other organizations like APA and Black House, will all be, really centered on Romir Talley in that case and his family. So we're just really happy to be able to be involved in that. And then, another thing, the weekly thing to mention at the beginning of the episode is that, coronavirus cases continue to spike. So just, as the holiday season approaches, I know, it's inevitable that a lot of people will still be, visiting with family and everything, but please do your best to be smart and be safe, and try to keep all your people and everyone else safe, even during this holiday season.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important and imperative that people remember that we're still in a global pandemic, right? And what we've seen after last night is that a global pandemic does not stop the violence from the police officers. It does not stop the over policing that happens and that is happening. And so it's very important that people are aware of what's going on, are able to protect themselves and their family members at this time. So we are, doing this a few days away from the holidays. And it's very important that when we talk about the toy drive, we remind people that this is something that Romir did, prior to the police taking his life. He was a member of Mad Dads, and, every year they were doing toy drives. He was a father himself who was very involved. And so all of these events that we're doing in his honor are just building upon the foundation that he laid while he was here. And that's something that we want to be very clear and intentional about. And we know that the past 48 hours have been a lot for a lot of organizers with the shooting in McKeesport, and people are very traumatized from the stops and the searches and basically the state violence that happened, after the officer involved shooting. And this is another reminder that when we talk about alternatives to policing, we're talking about ways to keep our community safe. We're talking about ways that we rely on each other to avoid the situations that occurred. And so it's been a very, I guess, trying few hours. But on top of that, on the national front, they got the stimulus package, right? I don't know can we call it a stimulus package? What do we call that? Like, it's like a micro investment. I think that it's been a long weekend. The city passed their budget. They promised to engage the community citizens more, but again, the budget didn't see the reductions that the community had asked for. But it's just been just a long weekend of really the government showing that they're willing to do the least to protect the people.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think that's a really good point you just raised there. Um, yeah, so I think I think Kahari should still be joining us in the next couple minutes. But I think on that note, that we can go ahead and jump into our panel of guests to begin that discussion.
Yeah, and so first we want to bring in Paul Juvis. Paul is a local attorney here in the Pittsburgh area, who also right now for this particular broadcast is the lawyer for the Talley family and has been, advocating on the family's behalf for the past few months, but has also just been working with other survivors of police and state violence. And so we welcome attorney Paul Juvis.
Hey, thanks, y'all, for having me.
Yeah. So can you just, I guess, to get right to it, can you just talk about what is the status of the lawsuit that y'all have filed against the borough of Wilkinsburg?
So, we're at the beginning. We already filed the lawsuit. And at this point, we're just going through the typical song and dance that every federal lawsuit goes through. It's that we file the complaint, and then the defendants that we're suing, which include, Officer Gowans and the Wilkinsburg Police Department, they get an opportunity to file motions to dismiss and motions for summary judgment, and that's typical. That happens in every single case. So we're at the frustrating beginning, towards in the march towards justice in the courts. But like you guys have mentioned, there's a much broader fight for justice that happens in these situations, and the activists and you guys are doing such a great job of keeping that part of Romir alive. The part that, like you said, he was building a foundation. He was literally getting into real estate, and he was devoting a lot of effort into building homes and to developing a hustle. So Romir was a good dude, used his hands to build and was taking care of his family, and was his mother's rock. So it's a really beautiful thing to, and it's like I said, I'm honored to be able to fight for him in the court system, but it's great to see the activists, putting on for Romir in the community.
And so for people who are not aware, can you just talk about what happened, what we so far know happened last December 22nd?
Sure. We know that Romir was walking home. We believe that he was walking home from a Wendy's that his friend worked at. And there was a 911 call. And it was a 911 call, on Penn Avenue. And the caller said that somebody pulled a gun on him. And that person was wearing a black hoodie and sweatpants and a jacket. And he was walking down Penn Ave. So the Wilkinsburg Police Department show up, and they stop two black men. First two black men that they stop, they let them go. And then they come upon Romir a few blocks down. Now, it appears as though, based on the statements that they've made, it appears as though they didn't give any sort of warning. They didn't try to de-escalate any sort of situations. They didn't even know if it was him. In fact, we have an EMS report showing that they were told that it wasn't him. But what they did was the police, in an aggressive maneuver, as he's walking down Penn, the police pull up in front of him. One of the cops is yelling from the car that he needs to pull his hands out of his pockets. And then Officer Gowans gets out as that's happening and starts coming after Romir. and now mix that with the fact that we know through the EMS report that the 911 caller, once they follow Romir down the alley, says, "You are following the wrong person." The guy is still on Penn Ave. So then, Romir is chased by Officer Gowans. The chase ends with Romir being shot 7 times, including 1 in the head. And one of the interesting things about those circumstances was that if you were to look at the autopsy photos, which I obviously will not be making public, but the bullets were coming at him from an angle where it looks like he had to have been shot while he was tumbling. So one of the things that we think is an absolute possibility is that he fell while he was running away, and that's when he got shot, because none of these were square. If Officer Gowans claims that Romir fired at him first, they never found a bullet. We think that was a planted gun. If we had the benefit of body cams and dash cams, and some of that evidence corroborated what they said, we would be in a different position. But every single piece of evidence that has come out since then has contradicted the story that the Wilkinsburg Police Department told. So according to Officer Gowans, he is fired upon, and that is when he returns fire, striking Romir 7 times. Based on that story, Romir would have been squared up with him. If Romir squared up, how did he get shot in so many different angles? So it just, it doesn't make any sense. And it was what the family was yelling from the get-go, that this is not what happened. It could not have been Romir, because Romir was a peaceful person. I was getting phone calls from his friends saying that this is not the guy. Romir was at all times calming us down, saying that, don't go down this road. Go down the peaceful road. Be reasonable. Think about it. He was involved with Mad Dads for that reason. He was his mother's rock for that reason. So yeah, we don't believe the police story that was told. And thus far, like I said, the EMS report, we had a witness come out. Everything appears to, and we have some video contradicting what they said Romir was wearing. So everything that has come out is contradicting an important part of the story. So, we've seen that story before. Big surprise, the police are lying when they get caught with their hands in the cookie jar.
Yeah, I really appreciate you providing all those details, and breaking that down as best you could with the information that's been able to be available. And I'm glad that you mentioned the fact that there was no body cameras, and the fact that there are these disputed storylines and narratives surrounding that. So I was wondering if you could speak to just like the overall lack of transparency and accountability that's occurred as a result of that lack of body cameras, and difficulties with getting more information from the body's investigators.
It's infuriating to think that in 2020 we're in a situation where there's not body cams and dash cams, and it's not a unique situation. So, we have over 115 police, municipal police departments in this area. And I've come across a lot that don't. Some of them do, a lot of them don't. It's asinine. There should be something in the law to say, for lawsuits or for criminal cases, where if there isn't a body cam or a dash cam to corroborate what the police are saying in that circumstance, there should be a negative inference that we should arrive at. They don't deserve, and then that good cops, I don't care who it is. I don't care if Jesus is a cop. He doesn't deserve, if he's not wearing a body cam, he doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, which is what every police officer gets in this system. So, it's infuriating that fundamentally we're not starting with the body cam footage, because we should be. And that's an expectation that we should have. It's simply unacceptable. I mean, it's a fundamental, we have to have a lot of different discussions about the Romir Talley case, but we need to stop and say, this cannot happen. you know, and Wilkinsburg police, you know, Wilkinsburg has put forward no effort whatsoever into getting them. That's why I'm trying to disband them. That's why I'm coming at Wilkinsburg with everything I have, because they're not even putting forth an effort. It's not realistic. You know, we're just getting lip service from them.
And so, it's kind of to add some more to the discussion, we want to bring in Kevin Mosley. Kevin Mosley is a retired Pennsylvania state trooper who, you know, has been very involved in a lot of these cases and talking about the need for change, the need for a different series, and talking about the lack of body cameras. How I think a lot of people have the notion that all the police departments have body cameras, and that whether it's what happened over the weekend, that there should be camera footage in all of these precincts. But Allegheny County has over 130, I believe, policing entities. So how likely or how available right now are body cameras for these policing entities in Allegheny County?
So off the top of my head, I can't tell you who has them, who doesn't, how many. But as the attorney stated, there are a number of departments in Allegheny County that don't. And you have to go back and you have to ask yourself, why not? You have to ask yourself, okay, why aren't there, you know, if we're talking about change, where's the insurance company in all this that insures the various municipalities? That's something that they can say, you're not getting insurance unless you have dash cams, unless you have body cams, you know, for all your cars and for all your officers, and they're trained in that. So that's a start in terms of the departments themselves. Going back to Ramir's case in particular, yeah, I'm thinking back to what his grandmother said last December when this first happened. She wants the truth, and I think that's what the community wants. Period. They want to know, and it's kind of hard when you don't have at this point in time, you know, where we are. We want to see police. We want to see footage. I mean, that's how the officer in Penn Hills was exonerated in that shooting. They were able to show he had a body cam on and showed clearly that his life was in danger. Here we're in a situation where, you know, we don't know what happened. We have to take, at this point, we're taking the word of the officer. You know, we're looking for, is there other footage out there from nearby businesses? And if there is, have we seen it?
There is. We haven't released it yet. It doesn't match up.
Okay. So, and then, you know, it goes back to what the DA said.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, it's not of the incident.
It's not of the incident.
That's correct. It's there are videos of Romir walking down Penn Avenue, you know, certainly not looking like somebody who just held somebody up. He's just meandering down Penn Avenue, scrolling through his phone like any of us would be doing, walking, you know, bored. Not the looks of and the what he was wearing doesn't match the description that was given. So, you know, like I said, not at all matching the looks of somebody that just pulled a gun on somebody and is now, you know, getting away from the scene.
Did any of that footage even show him with it? You know, so you're his attorney, so I'm not gonna ask you any questions in terms of what it actually showed, but you got to wonder from a public perspective, any of this footage show him carrying a weapon? As you said, what didn't appear to be in the act of committing a crime. And, you know, one of the important things when you do these cases is what's the timeline? You know, you have a 911 call. What matches up? What doesn't match up? What's the ballistics? The gun? Who did the gun come back to? And those are things that the police would know by now. Obviously, it's been a year, so they ran that gun. They knew right away who it came back to, or if it was a stolen gun or what. So those are other questions that come into play.
And that gets to Ryan's question with, you know, what's the transparency from the various law enforcement agencies that are dealing with this investigation. And there has been some bit of transparency from the Allegheny County Police Department. However, that was very limited. You know, they were willing to be transparent with some things, but when it started to get down to the really critical issues and questions, they would just punt to the district attorney, and the district attorney is a wall.
Yeah, and I understand that their position there, they're limited in what they can release, and then they would have to hand that off to the DA's office and say to the DA, what do you want to, how much of this can you release? And there's not a lot that he can, particularly if there is, you know, let's play devil's advocate. Romir was not the individual who was the actor. Well, that means there's someone else out there that brought this about and can be indicted for murder because he led to, you know, he ends up leading to Romir's death, his actions.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the frustrating things is that, you know, I practice in Philadelphia as well, so I work with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, just like I work with the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office, and they might as well not even be the same office. They shouldn't be. It is a different type of law practice when I'm dealing with Philadelphia's district attorney because you communicate. You know, as lawyers, we have a duty of civility. It's a very important part of our job. We are supposed to civilly deal with other lawyers so that we could best take these cases through the system because they're difficult to take through. There is no civility from the district attorney's office. There is nothing because it's a giant dumpster fire. You know, and a lot of it isn't malice. You know, it's not that they're like, oh, well, you know, they're laughing, you know, because they're hatching evil plots. It's just poorly run and terribly run. And the one of the main district attorneys, one of the main deputies, just died of COVID while he had a lawsuit against the district attorney's office. They are an absolute mess of a dumpster fire, and you know, there's no working with them, and there's no reason to offer them any sort of benefit of the doubt. They have no credibility. They just set a baby killer free.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of want to interject right quick with Mr. Mosley. You were talking about the Penn incident and how the officer's life was in jeopardy. For people, a lot of times when we hear things like, of the officer feared for his life or officer feared for his safety, we think of things of like, okay, what would I as a normal person feel if my life was in jeopardy? Would it be like somebody 5 feet away from me, 10 feet away from me? Because the Pennsylvania State Troopers are kind of, I guess, the premier policing agency in Pennsylvania with the training and the standards. When you were going through your training, how was that safety? How were you trained? And what should people know about engaging with police? Because we've seen a lot of, you know, whether it was a situation in Virginia, a lot of times officers do misidentify folks, right? It happens very frequently. There are generic descriptions of people. And so if you're looking for a white man in a white t-shirt, hundreds of people will fit that description. So how should people understand how the police rules of engagement are, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, I understand. So within policing, so as a youth sports firearms instructor, whenever I would talk to our officers and take them out to the range, the state police did it based on their accreditation, and it was every 6 months. We had to take our officers out to the range, and they had to be competent, more than competent, in the use of not only their firearms, but the use of force continuum. So use of force continuum, you start with just your presence. Then the next step is your hands, hand to hand, if you have to use that. You know, you raise your voice, make sure that people know that you are there. You give the commands to let them know what you want them to do. And then from that point on, you have your hands, you have an ASP baton, the collapsible baton, you have pepper spray, you have a taser. So there's a number of things that you can do before going. You're not supposed to go straight to your gun unless you feel serious bodily injury is imminent and or death. So in those instances, that's when an officer is justified in using his gun. When he fears that this person could seriously injure me, or this person can kill me, officers have every right to use what the public calls deadly force. But officers are not trained to shoot to kill. Officers are trained to shoot to stop the action. That's how we train them. We don't talk about, all right, you're trying to kill this person. No, you're shooting center mass, double tap to try and stop that individual from the threat that they are. And once you double tap, you look at the target. You might double tap again, but you need to make sure you're not panic shooting. You're trying to make sure that what you are doing has stopped the individual. If you're emptying your clip, you're not doing it the way you were taught.
So, one of the questions that's related to that I had then, I was reading earlier about, your thoughts on the Michael Rosfeld case, and the outcome of that, and some statements you had about how he hadn't followed proper training throughout a lot of that traffic stop. And so I was wondering, again, it's hard to say a lot of the details of this case because so little has been released and isn't, verifiable by body cam. But, from what we know about this case, if you could comment on what sort of procedure an officer should have followed, in this Romir Talley case. For example, should they, if they believed that the people that they were stopping were armed, should they have waited for backup before engaging? And then again, with what you just spoke about, the double tap, and then, checking things out versus, panic firing. So just like different procedure like that.
So with respect to, Antoine's case, or it wasn't, obviously not his case, but it was as if he was on trial. The officer, it's a felony stop. In a felony stop, you're not supposed to conduct a felony stop by yourself. You wait for backup. But he not only did it by himself, he did it in front of a building where he had to have known that there were people still in there because he was just in that building, within the hour. So he's not only endangering himself, he's endangering people in that building, which is why. So you have to pick your spots when you engage someone who you think has committed a serious crime. And then you have the fact that Antoine runs doesn't give you the right to shoot him, and multiple times. So I was in the courtroom the second day. I was fortunate enough to be in there to actually see the exhibits that the prosecution put on, and actually hear the testimony of the witnesses. And the witnesses had some obstructive views, but for it was kind of sad that the jury seemed to not give any credence to the person who was closest, like 2 houses away, who literally saw Antoine raise his hands, turn away from Roosevelt, and just run. So it's like he did not present as a threat, in my estimation. And therefore, what was Roosevelt shooting at and shooting for? That you can't. At this point, he's unarmed, as far as he could tell, but he's shooting for what? So, you get trained, and it's a matter of when was the last time. In Pennsylvania State Police, we do updates. We do legal updates. We do updates on what on all the weapons that we have. We go back to the academy once a year, in addition to going to the range twice a year. In addition to the firearms instructors talking to troopers about the things that the department wants to stress in terms of weapons retention. So you've got a higher degree of professionalism within departments that you would hope that are accredited. With respect to the second part that we were talking about that you wanted to get to, Ryan, remind me again.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, and again, if you can't really comment on this just because we don't have, that much information yet, and there's no body cam and everything, that absolutely makes sense. But if there's anything you could comment to.
I think I can clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically what happened was, and we have this is, this is from both sides. We have that two black men were stopped. They move on to Romir, and at that point, they pull in front of him. As he's walking down the street, they pull in front of him, and immediately one of the officers starts yelling, "Take your hands out of your pockets," at the exact same time that Officer Gowans is getting out and coming at Romir, yelling the same thing. We have the EMS report saying that once Romir runs away down the alley and they follow him, that they're told by dispatch that they just went the wrong way, because the 911 caller was still on the phone and said, "You guys just went down an alley. Our guy's on Penn Ave still." So one of the things that we learned from the Allegheny County Police was that despite the fact that they, even though ostensibly Officer Gowans believes that he's following somebody that just pulled a gun on somebody, the Allegheny County Police said that he was running after Romir with a taser, which they thought was very strange. And then at the only time that Officer Gowans pulls out his gun is when, according to Officer Gowans, he's fired upon. And then he pulls out his gun, shooting Romir 7 times. And the only square shot was to the side of his head. The rest of them were in various strange, just very strange angles. So that's what we know.
So was there a residue test done on Romir?
Yeah, but I mean, if you planted a gun on somebody, you can put it in their hands and they're going to have residue if it was recently fired.
So with respect to the taser, Gowans does show restraint there. If he's running after him and he's thinking, okay, I'm running after somebody and that tells me he didn't see a gun. He's running after him to stop him, but he doesn't feel like his life is in danger, because if he did, he would have drawn his weapon, at least training. So if he's going after him with the taser, what he's telling me is that I didn't feel like I was in there was a threat of serious bodily injury. But also going back to your point, Ryan, they pulled in front of him. That's something else with respect to training. You put yourself in a position where you're now in danger, and you're not supposed to do that. You're literally supposed to keep distance. I mean, think Tamir Rice. Their excuse for shooting Tamir Rice was you pulled up. Now you're in front of this kid that you think has a gun, but really you were told I think it's a toy, and you never even gave him an opportunity. You shot him. So this is where police also make mistakes in terms of. Here's what happens. The job is boring as hell most of the time. Unfortunately, people get lackadaisical in their training and in reminding themselves of how their job is supposed to be done. And when that happens, you make mistakes. So I'm not saying he made a mistake by running after him. I'm saying he actually did the right thing. If he didn't see a gun, and obviously that's what he's telling me. He's running after him with the taser, so that tells me you didn't see a gun. You just saw somebody running and you think that's your suspect. Now, whether or not he heard dispatch, that's a question only he can answer. Did he hear them say, "Hey, I didn't hear you when you said that you're going the wrong way. That's not the right person."
So his story was actually that dispatch confirmed that they were following the right person.
And so we've been having this conversation, and we know it's been very heavy for a lot of people. And so what we wanted to do is bring in Superintendent from the Woodland Hills District, James Harris, to kind of join this conversation, because you came to Pennsylvania kind of at the height of conversations about policing. There was a lot going on in the schools. There was a lot of violence. We saw a lot of officers involved in harming a lot of youth, and you basically took the police out of your local school district. And so we just wanted just to talk to you about what people can be doing, and to kind of encourage people and give people a little bit of hope as we have this conversation. Just a little bit of hope, as we have this conversation. And so can you just talk about what Woodland Hills was like prior to you coming, and the changes that you've made. You're muted.
Thanks for having me, first of all. I'm from Philadelphia, the Philadelphia area. So being on the east side of PA, as Mr. Juvis said, is much different than the west side. It's totally different worlds out here. And the board, well, I was watching in the news what was happening around the country, and saw what was happening at Woodland Hills. And I reached out to some folks and said, I want to go there. I think I could help. Because at the time, my son was a junior in high school, and the kids looked like him. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. That's what's happening. I think I could help. So I reached out to some folks, and well, long story short, I'm here. The board, when I arrived, was already in the process of putting some restorative justice practices in place to help de-escalate incidents between students and staff. However, the police at the high school were used for discipline. And as Mr. Mosley said, and in all honesty, I'm a former military policeman. So I went to the military police academy. I'm used to, I know the techniques. When an officer appears, it's an escalation. It's not a de-escalation. So involving a uniformed, armed officer in body armor and and all the gear is not going to settle most people down. And the way they were utilized in the school was for discipline purposes. So I think anyone on this panel could say when we were in middle school or high school, we were plucking ears, wedgies, pushing people, shoving people, doing things, but there weren't criminal responses, charges to that. So what was happening is they were criminalizing just juvenile behavior. And from that, students were taken to the court in front of the magistrate, getting records, paying fines, and it became very confrontational. So instead of just kicking the police out, I offered them options. One was to get to know the kids. Two, to come in a different uniform. We scaled back their uniforms. They put on polo shirts. They still had a badge. They had the belt, the cargo pants. It was less intimidating. I mean, these guys looked like they were invading a foreign country, coming in their jackets and everything. And I asked the officers when I returned to the school in a couple of days, tell me a story about a student, engage. And they couldn't do that. And this is Pittsburgh. I mean, Woodland Hills, Pittsburgh football. If you can't talk to a football player about football at Woodland Hills or something in theater, some connection, you're not the right fit. So the first year we had two, the next year we had one, and the following year we had none. But we also put in mental health supports, behavioral supports, restorative circles. We partner with outside agencies to give the students and staff a comfort level of their environment. And the students said right away, it's less tense. I mean, when you don't have an armed person walking around the hallways controlling behavior, you create a less tense environment. So if me and Paul are walking down the hall together and he bumps me, if we're tense, we're going to fight. If we're relaxed, it's like, hey, my bad, excuse me. You just kind of move on. So the police were creating a tense environment where without them, with them being removed, it doesn't exist. And teaching the students and staff to engage appropriately helps. So there's no need for police.
Yeah, appreciate you breaking all that down. So I just wanted to ask you real quick about, one of the really important things that you just talked about there was the impact that had on the environment for the students and everybody else in the building, less hostile, much more comfortable, less tense. And so I was wondering if you could speak on, how that change in environment impacted, different student outcomes in the school, whether that be, any issues with discipline, whether that be any sort of educational outcomes, just, the general impact of that environmental shift on the students and staff. For that matter.
When there's an incident and you see a counselor or an assistant principal or a principal or a teacher coming in to break up a fight, there is a gray area and there's room for discussion to help do a restorative relationship. When the police come in, it was black and white. It was stop doing what you're doing or I'm taking you away. And we all know it at that teenage years, they want to debate. They want to talk. They want to argue their side. The police weren't hearing that. And also, the police didn't develop a relationship with the students. So the staff, they have relationships with the students, and they could talk them down. With the police, it was just matter of fact, stop what you're doing, cuff you, take you out. It doesn't work. So they were almost like invaders. They were an occupying force within the school. They were not connecting with the students. I'm a firm believer in living in the community that you work in, that you police in. And a lot of these issues, when the police roll up on people, they don't even know the people. The whole community goes, hey, he's a great guy. To the police, he's a stranger. If they lived and worked in the community, they would know who the person is. So with the police not being in the building, it required the administrative staff to take a larger role, and they had relationships and connections with the students, and it keeps it calmer. We were down my first year, negative incidents, almost 70%, because the police were put on the sideline. And the principal said, I'll call you when I need you. You stay in the office. And him and his staff trained to do everything. And it worked. It became a calmer environment. And then the police finally said, well, you don't even need us here, because we weren't utilizing them in the same way. And the young officer, who was fantastic, the young new officer, wanted to go out on the streets and patrol. So we didn't really need them.
And kind of going off about that, and because the two of you are police officers, when we were talking, here in Pittsburgh, there was the lawsuit. So the officers do not have to live within the cities that they patrol. And so when you're talking a situation where with Romir Talley, you had the first group of people, stop the wrong person. Second, come with Ms. Talley, possibly maybe the wrong person again. How do we now have this conversation about community policing, or what the role of policing should be, when we keep seeing kind of like these incidences of like violence, where it's like at this point it's too late, because like Romir's not here, so it's too late to walk back, or it's too late to say, oh, well, he should have done this. So how are we now supposed to proceed in the community? Because the Talley family has teenagers, people who are going to school, who are now dealing with that trauma, and so you're seeing the residual effects within the school districts. But also you're now seeing people in the community who are now saying, you know what, I'm not going to call police when something happens, because I don't want to be responsible if, an innocent person gets harmed.
Well, that happens when you have officers who only show up when there's conflict. You need to have a community policing force who works with the community, who talks to the community, who knows the citizens in the community. And if they go into a school, it could be for friendly reasons. However, the police on the outside can't create, instances where there's conflict, where students see a police officer and they run because of their older brother or father or siblings or relatives have had negative instances. And also, police are put in situations that they weren't trained to be in. I mean, when you fall down and hurt your leg, you don't call the police, you call the EMTs. So if someone's having a mental break, the police are sort of like the catch-all now for everything, and really shouldn't be the first ones on the scene, or not the only ones on the scene. There should be some sort of mental health component. We have students in school who are having a situation. We have a tactical trauma team who can go in there and help de-escalate that. It's not the punishment because you're upset. It's you're having an emotional distress. So who's better trained than someone else to go in there and talk to them? Not the disciplinary folks. They may be there to support, but not for everything. I mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. That was actually going to be my follow-up question, was like, do you see this model of phasing out police, at least for responding to certain situations, like something related to mental health, or just any sort of adolescent behavior or otherwise that doesn't need to be overly criminalized or met with that type of conflict? So yeah, I was just going to ask you if you saw some manifestation of that model being transferable not only to other school districts, but also to other aspects in the community, where somebody else, like a mental health professional, some sort of counselor, social worker, could respond to a lot of these incidents that don't need to be criminalized in that regard. So yeah, I appreciate you speaking on that.
Well, the best way to do it is to be proactive. It's to have eyes and ears in the community. So if something happens over the weekend, and this happens often, and the kids are coming to school that Monday. Well, we often are told, hey, James and Kevin had a big blow up in the park this weekend. They're coming into school, catch them at the door. So we'll catch them at the door, bring them in and have the conversation de-escalated, have them shake hands, and hopefully, have that bridge built between them and move on. If you don't have those eyes and ears in the community, then it's going to come into the schools. And that's when you have those all-out battles in school. So if you have officers and community members connected and are involved in activities outside of school or outside of whatever, then there's relationships. And that communication goes both ways. But you just have to make sure that being proactive versus reactive, the proactive side is much better. And it's almost impossible to measure and set, compared to prior years. And what we do now is being proactive. So other districts need to not just say, my day ends at 3:30. Your day is 7 days a week, 24 hours, because there are fires at homes, there are assaults, there's lots of other insecurities that occur that impact your learning day. So if we could provide many services or steer students and families to those services, all the better. You just can't remove police, tomorrow. You have to provide supports, build up those supports, and then phase them out.
So in New Haven, Connecticut, speaking of larger community, let's say you have somebody who appears to be drunk or intoxicated or under the influence of drugs. They won't send the police if they get a 911 call. And this is where you have to think about, okay, who do we want to send to these calls? How do we categorize 911 calls? They send their EMTs, but their EMTs are also in contact with the police. If they come across somebody who is about to OD, they can take care of them better than a police officer could. That's what they're trained to do. But if that person becomes violent, then they can immediately contact the police and get the assistance that they need. So they're there. They're not the police. They can immediately tell these people, no, I'm just here to help you. And literally that is what these agencies want to do anyway. You should be there to serve and to protect. And basically, like the medical profession, do no harm if you can. So when we look at defund the police, it's only going to go so far, because what people don't understand is you have these laws in place. So all these police departments have collective bargaining agreements. That is, you have to look at how that is written into law by the state, and you have arbitrators who determine discipline ultimately. So it's hard to fire a police officer. So if you want to actually defund the police fully, that's not going to happen. You can do it some. You can shift funds. I'm all for it. You have to do that. You got to shift some of the funds. You have to put funds in a different place in social services, as James was talking about, to assist the community, but also put funds into the community in terms of housing, into the community in terms of education. There's a number of other things that we can do and should be doing in terms of the homeless. What are we doing for them? You can't say, and going back to what you're talking about, Miracle, within the city, a police officer can live within 25 miles of the courthouse. So literally most of these guys, as James pointed out, they don't live in the city. They don't know people in the community. They come into the city, they take the money, and they leave. When they retire, that money goes with them too. So what service are they really providing? Where are our tax dollars going? Our tax dollars are leaving the city if most of these guys work outside the city. So the city needs to think about, okay, do we want to try and subsidize housing for police officers to get them to move into the city? So there's things that we need to think about in terms of, are there incentives that we could provide them to want to be in the community, work with the community, and to gain a better understanding of who you're working for. We also need to consider in terms of individuals we have working for us. When people come to work, you need to be able to be your authentic self. You need to be able to talk about the community that you work in, the community that you live in, if you live in this community. As a Black officer, I never really had the opportunity, except with other Black officers, to talk about, hey, this is what I'm seeing, and I don't think it's right. But if you try to say that to the command structure, they don't want to hear that, because this is how policing has always been set up. You're there to take orders from the command structure, even if you know that what they're doing is over policing Black folks. And that needs to be addressed. And it's really, the police officers that work in various communities are going to tell you, hey, are we really doing the right thing? Because I worked in this zone, and that's not how I never saw this many officers working in Squirrel Hill. But we're gonna flood other communities with officers, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So those are things that we need to think about in terms of, if we're going to talk to corporations and nonprofits and say, okay, you need to address diversity, equity, inclusion. How are they addressing diversity, equity, inclusion in policing, other than, oh, we're going to give them implicit bias training? Not enough. You really need to be able to have conversations within a department with the command structure to tell them, hey, this is what we're seeing in terms of who's getting arrested and why, because of the first consent decree, or that with the DOJ, Pittsburgh was the first one placed under that 24 years ago, and it's not working, because you look at the last 3 years, who's getting stopped, who's getting frisked, who's getting arrested. It's largely young black men Black people are only 23% of the city, but represent a huge proportion of the arrests, stops, and frisks. When if you're actually doing it equitably, that shouldn't be happening. So they need to think of other ways to go about this. Like I said, I'm all for defund the police, but you have to look at the limitations in terms of the law, and you really need to think about, how do we address the 100 and some odd police departments we have in Allegheny County, because it's not just Pittsburgh. Allegheny County has those same disproportionate numbers that affect Black people. And there's not as many of us in those suburbs. So we need to have a way to address that situation.
And so going back to the attorney, because we're talking about getting to know people. For a lot of folks in Wilkinsburg, that this is not the first time the Talley family has been a victim of police violence, or has, lost someone to police violence. So how is the family doing now, and what are some of the things that the family is asking for? Because they're not really getting, like you said, any transparency from the Wilkinsburg. It took over 8 months for them to just release the name of the officer who was involved. So, how are they holding up, and what are some of the things that they're asking the community to do at this time?
The family is doing as you would expect, and that's not well. I'll discuss his mom afterwards, but he has a number of family members that have been, right there with his mom and active on the streets from the get-go, and they're handling it very well. They're strong, they're intelligent, they're educated, and they have a good head on their shoulders, and they want to see justice, and they're doing whatever they can. But they're obviously heartbroken. They're immensely disappointed in the system's reaction to this, as all of us are. It's been incredibly difficult to watch this, and to watch the wall of silence from everybody in the system. But his mother is just in bad shape, as would be expected. Like you mentioned, Romir's father was lost to police violence. But shortly before Romir was killed by the Wilkinsburg police, she lost her granddaughter, Romir's daughter. So, she is, that I think that's been one of the more frustrating things to deal with, has been to You know, we do not have a system that's built to help people like Tasha Talley. You know, it's built to keep her on the outside. And, you know, when you have a woman that has been harmed and hurt the way that she has, that's not right. You know, that she should, like, it shouldn't be. And this is a conversation that I've had, you know, a number of times with Danielle Brown, who you guys deal with. You know, this system is not built for the victims of this violence. You know, it is very much built to keep them on the outside, and that's we have a responsibility to not let that stand. You know, I'm doing what I can, but a civil rights attorney is not designed. Our role is not prepared to shoulder that entire burden. You know, that it's got to be a much broader effort, and the system needs to be changed dramatically, because this can't stand. You know, this idea, the way that the system has responded to Tasha Talley's trauma is absolutely disgusting.
And you talked about the system being changed. Again, can you just walk through the steps of what led y'all to file the lawsuit, and what the response has been?
So, you know, we needed to, for when you know, I was brought in, we had to conduct our own independent investigation, and very little was available. You know, we didn't have the benefit of a body cam or a dash cam, which would have been priceless in a situation like this, you know, because all we've had a few pieces of evidence come out, and every single one of them contradicted an important part of the story that Officer Gowans told. So, you know, it's just, there are many layers of disappointment here. You know, there are no body cams and dash cams, which is unacceptable from the jump. So we are in an unjust situation. And then every bit of evidence is contradicting this guy's story. So, you know, a gun was found, you know, but what just happened in Philadelphia? And, you know, that somebody was just exonerated from a rape, you know, because and they realized that evidence was planted by a cop that was potentially going to get in trouble. It happens regularly. In a place like Philadelphia, it gets exposed. You know, in a place like Pittsburgh, it's expected that it's not going to, because we have a much different ecosystem here. You know, it's built differently. So, you know, we conducted our own investigation. We realized that there were a bunch of holes in Gowan's story. We filed the lawsuit in federal court. And at this point, we're just, you know, kind of going through the song and dance of, you know, we file something, they file something, we respond to it. You know, it's just the first couple of steps. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and then in addition to you know, the civil case, the lawsuit that you filed, and again, if you don't have an answer for that, that's completely understandable. But I was just wondering if there have been, you know, any updates that you've heard, whether it be from the DA or from the Allegheny County Police Department, as far as progress on their investigation, even if it's not specific information, if they've concluded those investigations, when they'll be concluded. Or really any update.
It's not
all,
funny, I'm not making light of this, but the idea of you know, productive communication from the district attorney's office is a joke. This district attorney, you know, and it's not the way that it should be. The district attorney is the head of law enforcement in a given county. They have a responsibility to lead, you know, and there's been none of that. So, you know, it's been incredibly frustrating. Like I said, the Allegheny County Police would speak a little bit, but again, it's difficult because every single police department in this area has a very big credibility problem, especially after coming after the, you know, this, it's not as if, you know, this is just an isolated incident. Our system, our law enforcement apparatus in this area has been devolving. So, you know, when you can have conversations with former district attorneys that served 10 years ago, proudly don't recognize the district attorney's office that they are now dealing with as defense attorneys. And it is causing a bit of, you know, what Mr. Harris was talking about with regards to Philadelphia being a different place. we're finally starting to see, you know, a change in the attitudes of the lawyers involved in the system to be like, wait a second, you know, this is an absolute mess. We have a district attorney's office that lacks credibility entirely, and all they do is stonewall. You know, so, you know, to answer your question, where is the investigation? You know, there is no reason to believe anything that they would say about the investigation. You know, as far as we were, you know, rewind a year ago, before we learned that they set a confessed baby killer free, you know, they were making assertions that the investigation was ongoing. Didn't mention that they already got a confession from the guy that killed baby Marcus and set him free. There is no reason to believe anything that they say about an investigation. In fact, when they say an investigation is still ongoing, I think of Gino, that, you know, the Gino case that he covered up a murder for. You know, the district attorney covered up that murder investigation. The district attorney covered up the baby Marcus murder investigation. And now here we are in the Romir Talley case. And despite the fact that there's very little evidence, this investigation is still ongoing. So I don't, you know, one of the something that is commonly, you know, smart to do in terms of a civil rights lawsuit, you wait until the criminal investigation is over. That's something that you know, you can reasonably do. We weren't going to do that because we don't believe anything that the district attorney would say.
And so, like I said, I do thank you for coming on and sharing that. And I know you've been busy all day and all weekend, just with the family and lifting up information. So is there anything that the community should be doing to advocate, to help, and to be supportive at this time in regards to the case? You know, people registered to vote, they voted, there's a possibility people can be picked for jury duty. But besides that, is there anything else that people should be doing right now?
Yeah, we Allegheny County, the city of Pittsburgh, we need to start having very serious and realistic expectations for the police forces that are on the streets around here. Not having body cams and dash cams is unacceptable. You know, what about the next kid that gets killed? The next father that gets killed? Oh, we're just going to believe that story that cop tells because we're just accepting the fact that they don't have body cams and dash cams? They lie all the time. They get caught lying all the time. It's unacceptable. We have a mayor that can get the boot. In the next couple of years, we have a district attorney that can get the boot. In the next couple of years, we have a county executive. Those three things, those three offices in the next 4 years are up for grabs. We can completely revolutionize this system in the next 4 years if we're up to it, if we stay organized, if we stay focused. If not, we're just going to still be playing the same stupid game over and over again.
I know we're wrapping up, but Superintendent Harris, I did have just one more question for you. So possibly, more than likely, the schools will be open come January. People will be, students, everyone will be back in the buildings. We know a lot of mental health, everything is like going on. What are some of the resources and preparations that y'all are preparing to make sure that when everyone is back in, we're not going to see like a rise in policing of youth and students?
We have to make sure, well, one, it's highly unlikely that schools will be open in January, maybe the spring, but with the police, they're not needed. What we did at the high school was, when we need you, we'll call you. We never called them because we didn't need them. You know, they can do something else, and it's fine. You know, like I said, I always say I'm not anti-police. I'm just anti-police in schools. You know, the police serve a purpose. They have a role, but it's not patrolling the hallways of a high school criminalizing juvenile behavior. And it's simple as that. The board, my bosses, gave me an edict and said, you know, make it a safer, better environment. They had put things in place before I got here, and I just continued on with those. And the end result, well, one of the steps is removing the police because they weren't needed. The board saw a need. And just like Mr. Mosley said, the whole chain of command. Well, the chain of command, you know, for me, it's the board, then the community. The community didn't need the police. in the buildings. The board echoed that, and they gave me the mandate, well, do something about it. So I had to put things in place along with my directors, my administrators, and we found a way to do that. Anyone could find a way to do that. Any district in the country could find a way to do that. You just have to have the nerve and the understanding of what your population wants and what they need, and don't criminalize, adolescent behavior. That trickles out into the real world, where the police, when someone sees the police officer down, they'll run, or they won't interact with them, or they're afraid. You should not be afraid. And if the police are part of the community under community policing, know who they are and call them by name, you'll see a lot less of these incidents where mistaken identity, or the police are just afraid a lot of times. They're meeting people and they just don't know them. They're afraid of them. And they fear for their lives. That's why they always say, I feared for my life. No, you didn't. You were just afraid of the person in front of you because you didn't know them. Simple as that. So what we're going to do is make sure we have behavioral interventionists, our teachers, also our staff. We provide mental health for our staff also, make sure that they're in safe, healthy environments. And we're going to go back little by little. One of the things that we're missing right now is social interaction amongst our staff and our students. There's no engagement, particularly with the younger ones. Our babies, they're not interacting with anyone. They're stuck in the house. The COVID numbers are higher here than pretty much anywhere else in PA right now. So hopefully in the spring, we can go back. We can start this, get a reboot, and start over again. But with the COVID situation and the police, and now it's winter and snowy and everybody's locked in, it gets dark earlier. It's just miserable. However, we can get out of this. And like the attorney said, we got to use our vote. If you want change, you got to vote. If not, shut up and you get what you get. So if you want change, we could take those steps and make it happen. If not, it doesn't work.
All right. Well, on that note, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to get in contact, James Harris is the Woodland Hills Superintendent. Kevin Mosley is a retired Pennsylvania trooper and firearms instructor. And Paul Juvis is a local attorney here in Pittsburgh who is representing the Talley family in their federal lawsuits against the Wilkinsburg police. And so, gentlemen, thank you all so much for coming on. This is just the beginning for this week. Like I said, we are using our platform to bring awareness to the Romir Talley tragedy. And so tomorrow on What Black Pittsburgh Needs to Know at 2:00, we'll be hearing from some family and friends of Romir Talley. We have invited Romir's mother to join us, but like Attorney Juvis was saying, it's very hard for her right now. So she has an invitation, but if she's not mentally and emotionally able to do so, she may not be there. But some of Romir Talley's friends and family will be on the show, in addition to Fawn Walker Montgomery, the amazing, brilliant Fawn, who literally has spearheaded this case, who's gotten organizers to come and to support the family, who's made sure that we haven't forgotten anyone with the Talley family. And so Fawn will also be on tomorrow and just talk a little bit more about what this fight has been and the disrespect, that this family has just endured, just trying to just find what happened, get an explanation of why their son was murdered. And there just hasn't been any communication. And it's very heartbreaking and heart-wrenching to watch this happen to a family who is just the kindest, sweetest, most gentle. And I just asked, just tell me what happened to my son. And so we'll have them on tomorrow. In addition, there will be a celebration of Romir's life at 6:00 at the Black House Collections. People socially distanced, wearing masks. I'm not sure how many people are going to be involved because, there's COVID restrictions. That's also going to happen. But please give your love and support to the Romir Talley family. For those of you who are involved in politics, register to vote. So, there is an election, but voting is just one tool. We can organize, we can protest, we can write policies, we can change legislation, we can engage in mutual aid, we can support each other, provide mutual aid and mental health support to one another. So you're right, we cannot dismiss anyone. We need everyone, all boots on the ground, the situation. And Ryan, did you have anything to say to close out?
No, really just to echo, some of the important points you just made. Utilize your vote, obviously, as has been mentioned several times. But there's so many other important aspects of building community power that Miracle just ran through. And we see in situations like, even things that should be as simple as getting more information for the family in the Romir Talley case, that, so many of those avenues of building community power and organizing and activating in the community are really essential. And that's what we're really trying to do, not only just this week when we highlight all of it, but throughout the year. So again, we'll be back, next week with another episode of the Power Hour. And yeah, everybody just have, a safe holiday. Try to enjoy your holiday. See your people if you can, but just be smart, be safe. And have a good holiday.
Yes, and I'm putting the Cash App to the Talley family in the comments, so we'll have that. But please be safe. Join us tomorrow at 2:00 for What Black Pittsburgh Needs to Know. We'll talk with friends and family of Romir, and then we'll discuss more about policing on This Week in White Supremacy, Wednesday at 6. So thank you all so much. Please practice mental health, focus on what brings you joy, and thank you all for joining us. Good night.